I admit I'm a total geek with this stuff, and I find it really fascinating, but this is the perfect term to describe 80s babies like myself, because I think we are a bit of both, but not purely either one, and yet it's not quite long enough to make it its own generation. It's not like 15 or 20 years. And I think, look, unless you were living under a rock, or unless you had, fundamentalist religious parents that cut you off from the world or something, chances are, if you were born in the 80s, you have a shitload of Gen X traits from your childhood. Even early 90s have a little bit too. And when I say traits, I just mean things like playing arcade games or remembering music on MTV or going to the mall when it was cool or and just remembering a time before social media and the internet was permeated our daily lives the way that it does now. And yet, despite this great impact that it made on our lives when we were young, we weren't, for the most part, we were just kids and we weren't old enough to party or anything either. In fact, that's probably the best distinction of all to make. If you were old enough to go clubbing in the 90s, you're definitely Gen X. And another thing I wonder is that if the more progressive or liberal 80s babies kind of adapted into being sort of elder statesmen millennials as we got older. Now, for this last example, I'm only talking about myself, so it's a little bit anecdotal, but for example, like I love my phone and social media. I voted for Bernie. I'm as progressive as you can get on any social or political issue. I consider myself non-binary, which is on the middle of the gender spectrum, so I'm not completely cisgendered. All the things that a lot of people think of millennials, I have almost all of them. And yet, on the other side, I have an entire fucking channel devoted to preserving pop culture and history from the 80s and 90s, anything that I find even remotely interesting, which are things that someone born in 97 would have absolutely no first-hand knowledge of, even if they liked it. And for a final point, what I also find interesting is that if you go back through time, the core of most generations is towards the beginning. Like, baby boomers are 1945 to 63. And yet, whenever we think of them, what do we think of? People that were in their teens or 20s during the 60s, like people that went to Woodstock. So, I mean, someone born in like 47 is like that was like hippie. That's like that's our image of what a baby boomer is. Or with Gen X, it's people like the Brat Pack from the Breakfast Club, born in like 68. And and yet the opposite's true with millennials. It's like I said, those of us born in the 80s are kind of shaky, kind of iffy about it. People born in the 90s seem to be the true blue millennials. Certainly, whenever there's an article bashing them, that tends to be whom it's directed at.